Hello everyone, today is day 15 of our 30-day watercolor flower project, and today is begonia. Begonias are beautiful, vivid, bright red flowers, but the main star is their very punchy and large yellow centers. So centers are made up of filaments and anthers. So together we call it stamen. So all of these stamen are sticking out in this center. They're bunched together. The filaments are the long part, and then the anther is the little bit at the end that contains the pollen. So the stamen of a begonia is really full, really long, bright yellow, and it's such a beautiful contrast to the very vivid red flower petals that it has. The petals on a begonia are pretty open, so you can always see the centers. They're full and bright and vivid. They have a little bit of curve to them, and they're pretty simple and easy to portray with watercolor. Begonias are very bush-like, and so there'll be lots of little begonias, and then they have very large leaves coming from all different directions, and then we'll fill in the gaps between the flowers with a little bit smaller greenery that's probably peeking through underneath. All right, we're going to start with the centers because they're the star of the show and they determine how we paint the flower petals. I'm picking up a very bright yellow and I'm doing quick light pressured strokes to make these long anthers for the stamen. How you paint these filaments is going to determine the direction and shape of your begonia. I'm also making sure to paint them in a tight bunch because there's lots together. They're almost one unit, but we're going to slightly leave some white space between them so we can tell that they are individual filaments as well. I'm picking up some yellow ochre and mixing it with my yellow to get a slightly darker yellow so that I can have anther on the end that are a contrasting, distinct, separate color. I am just lightly dotting this color on. I'm making sure that some are touching the filaments and then some are up higher on their own. Some are bigger, some are really tiny, some are kind of blended together, and then there's definitely enough white space to be able to tell that they are individual units. The petals of a begonia are so bright red. So we are not really lightening this up to have a lot of pink potential. It's bright cad red. And then when we go in to paint this, I'm really using the shape of my brush to just kind of place these petals in a circular C-shape motions, kind of moon shapes with rough edges. I want them to look fluffy. I want them to be circular, but I want them to be loose and have this feeling of separateness and kind of wild, chaotic shapes. So the petals are going to hug right around the centers. They're going to be fuller and thicker on the opposite side of where we placed the anther. So the little dots on top of the filaments, the petals on those sides are going to be thinner and smaller because those are the petals that are farther away from us. So to have the illusion that the flower is kind of to the side and we're seeing it from the side, all of the petals farther away from the anther are going to be fuller and wider, and then we're just going to wrap around and they're going to be thinner and a little bit more tucked in. And that's it for the flowers for now. We're going to let that completely dry while we work on the greenery. So for greenery, my favorite color combination is sap green, indigo, and yellow ochre. So I mix those three colors together until I get a bright, deep green, and we're going to start placing these leaves. Remember that the leaves are really large because begonias are on a bush, and so the begonias, in contrast to the leaves, are quite small. So don't be afraid to make these leaves just as big, if not bigger, than the begonias. And then we're going to fill in some of the gaps and add some tinier leaves on the edges. So you've heard me talk about my two-stroke method many times before, but we use light pressure on our brush to start the leaf. We push down on the body of the brush to create the shape of the leaf, and then drag down to create the length of the leaf that we want, and then lift up with light pressure for the end. Then we do the same on the other side and leave a white space in the middle to create a vein. I added a bit more indigo to the mixture so that we can start dabbing in some of that color while everything is still wet so we don't lose the opportunity to have that bleeding moment to create lots of depth within our leaves. I feel like when it comes to balance, flowers are pretty easy because if you stick to the rule of three, it's always going to look good. But placing leaves can really throw a whole piece off if you're not focused on how to balance it. So I always step back from my painting and look to see where I can add. So the right side feels a little less heavy, so I start adding tinier leaves to balance it out. And then anytime I have two leaves, like right here, I kind of want to add just a tiny one, and then it starts to feel very even and balanced, and I can breathe again. We're going to let our leaves dry, and now that our flowers are dry, we're going to go back in with that bright cad red and add some contrast to the petals. I'm focusing this color more towards the base of the petal where it's closest to the center because that's where the shadow would be. And I'm using very light pressure to make this pretty chaotic and not specific because it will end up looking more organic and natural. Now the flowers are done. We're going to add the contrasting color to the leaves by deepening our green with even more sap green and indigo, and then pretty much doing the same thing. I'm focusing on the base where I feel like a shadow would be, and I'm keeping it really light, adding it here and there. Remember, less is more, but that added contrast really gives so much depth because watercolor can lay so flat. So our goal is always to have light, medium, and dark values so that we can get the most out of our paintings and create the most interest. The leaves are finished. Make sure you clean your brush really well because now we're going in and adding the finishing contrasting colors to our centers, and we don't want any green in there. So I'm mixing in some yellow ochre with just a touch of brown. I think it was burnt umber that was already on my palette. And we're just going in and adding a little bit of dotting and lines to our filaments and anther to create just another layer of contrast because we want also in our center to have those light, mid-tone, and darker values. And with those details finished, our begonias are done. So now we get to add it to our watercolor flower guide in the day 15 spot. Oh my gosh, you guys, we are halfway done. This has been so much fun. And I love the bright red pop that this adds to the guide because we've done a lot of pink, but not a lot of red yet. So here's our beautiful red. Thank you so much for being here today while we painted day 15, the begonia. I will see you all tomorrow for day 16. Bye.